What's going on, everyone? Cash Creatures here. And today we're going to be tracking the prices of some ultra-modern chase cards and getting a sense of the current supply and demand in the market and seeing if there are any good opportunities left. So let's get right into it. First, we're going to take a look at the Pikachu EX from Ascended Heroes, aka the Trikachu. This card over the past 3 months is up 145%. So you've done pretty amazingly if you bought this card, right around the time that Ascended Heroes came out. If you take a look at the past month chart, there seems to have been a big buyout on June 11th of this card. We have 16 items sold when the average daily sold is about 3. And if we take a look at the lowest listed on eBay, we have one at 1200, but right after that, we go up to 1300 and 1400 fairly fast. So this card has been doing nothing but going up and up over time. And honestly, it is a pretty iconic art, and I do think this card is going to do well long term. And I think the price in the next 3 to 6 months depends heavily on how much Ascended Heroes Pokemon does end up printing and circulating throughout the market. But at this point, this card has already proven itself. I think this is going to be a very strong card in the long term. And if we take a look at PSA 10 prices for this card, it was selling for about $4,000 a few months ago. But now that a lot of the submissions have come back and people will get these slabs in their hands, we see the prices coming down quite a bit. We have some sales. We do have a sale here at $2,600, but it's only one bid and it's from a 0% positive feedback seller. So we're going to assume that this is not a real sale. Most sales seem to be ending up right now in the $3,000 to $3,300 range. This appears to be a best offer, so it might have gone for like $33,000. We got a couple that are under $3,000. Maybe $3,000 to $3,200 seems to be a fair price for this card. And if we look at the pop report for this card, this is not a very hard card to grade by any means. There have been about 5,000 copies graded at PSA so far, and 3,200 of those, over 3,200, have come back as 10s. And that gives this card a 66.2% PSA 10 gem rate. So not a very hard card to grade. If you do pull this card, make sure you inspect it well and see if it has a chance at a 10. More likely than not, if you keep it in good condition, it could get a 10. So I would say give it a shot and see if you can make the big play. And taking a look at the other chase card from Ascended Heroes, the Mega Gengar EX, taking a look at the 3-month chart. So this card is only up about 32% in the past 3 months, which is still nothing to scoff at. 32% is more than a lot of hedge fund managers make in a whole year across their entire portfolio. So 32%, pretty good. This card came out as the top chase card in Ascended Heroes, and it was already valued correctly at that point. So that's kind of why we're not seeing those explosive gains like the Pikachu. But if we take a look at the 1-month chart, we see that a similar buyout happened with this card around June 10th, where we sold 19 items that day on TCG Player. And we're selling otherwise approximately 2 items a day on TCG Player. Lowest listed for this card right now is about 1,400, pretty squarely. We have a few supply at 1,400 and then we go up to 1,500. And regarding the PSA 10s, we have a similar story with this card. I think it was up in the 4,000s earlier. Now it's coming back to the low 3,000s, it looks like. Maybe right under 3,000 is where this card's sitting. So we have about a 2x multiplier on the PSA 10 to the raw ratio for this card. So nothing too crazy. If we take a look at the gem rate for this card, it does seem to be very similar to the Pikachu EX. We have almost 7,000 graded at PSA, 4,500 coming back gem mints. So there have actually been more of these Gengar EXs graded with PSA than the Pikachu EX. So maybe people are finding that this card is easier to pull, or otherwise, I'm not really too sure. We could infer that this card is easier to grade. That's why more copies are being sent to PSA. But the gem rate is actually slightly less than the Pikachu EX's gem rate. So I don't know if we can make that conclusion. But it does seem like these two cards are continuously going up, the single value at least, and the PSA 10s have kind of settled down, and we're getting close to that 2 to 2.5x multiplier. So honestly, you could say maybe these PSA 10s are a fair price, considering how fast these cards have gone up, and the PSA 10s have not really continued to rise to like crazy levels or anything. So something to keep an eye on there. Take a look at the Mega Charizard X from Phantasmal Flames. Very iconic card. This card was all the rage a few months ago. And as of now, if we take a look at the raw price, it's still sitting around that $800 to $900 range. And the PSA 10s for this card have actually come down a bit. It seems to have peaked at around $2,800 to $2,900 near the end of April. But as more PSA 10s have come back and more collectors are getting their hands on these, the price and demand for this card has significantly come down. And this card right now is sitting at about $2,300 in a PSA 10. And there have been a lot of auctions that end right under that range as well. I've seen a lot of auctions end in the $2,200 range. Maybe even some buyers snuck out with a $2,100 PSA 10 Mega Charizard EX. So this card staying strong price-wise in its raw form, but the PSA 10 is coming down quite a bit. Taking a look at the raw sales on eBay, the raw price is actually staying pretty strong. We see a PSA 9 at $975. PSA 9s are typically close to the raw value of the card, especially for modern cards. We have a $950 best offer. Maybe this went down to like $900. We have what seems to be an incomplete sale here. We have about an $850 sale, another PSA 9 at $950. So this raw card is easily still $800 to $900. I don't think we've gotten a significant pullback in this card, at least in the raw copy. But it does seem like the PSA 10 is coming down quite a bit. And there are a lot of PSA 10s of this card out there. So honestly, this is probably one that you could wait, another month or two, and then maybe it gets to that point where demand meets supply and then the card starts running again. But if you can find this card in a PSA 10 for about $2,100, $2,200, I think you'll do very well for yourself, especially if you're planning on holding long term. Next, we have the Bubble Mew, the Mew EX from Paldean Fates. So very iconic card. In the past 3 months, this card is up about 45%, pretty much straight line upwards. In the past year, this card is up 245%. So pretty crazy gains there. It was about $280 not too long ago. I remember I bought a raw copy probably about a year ago for that price, like $270, $280. And if we take a look at lowest listed on TCG Player, they're right around that $1,000 range. So this is definitely a $1,000 card at this point, raw. And on TCG Player, we're selling about 49 copies per month. And there's actually only 22 copies listed on TCG Player in a near mint condition. So supply does seem to be running pretty low on this card. And that's why we're kind of seeing these price spikes at the moment. As for the PSA 10 copy of this card, going absolutely insane. The top chart, the blue line, shows the PSA 10 price over time. And, just steady climb. This card, Pokedata says it's about $3,400. But if we take a look at some of the recent sales on eBay, this card does seem to be crossing that $4,000 mark in a PSA 10. We have some sales very close to $4,000, even, a few above $4,000. One on June 11th, and we have one on June 10th as well, another on June 10th. So this is getting very close to that $4,000 mark in a PSA 10. Absolutely insane. This card is pretty iconic, but it's a pretty simple design, honestly. But the Bubble Mew, I think it's going to keep going up. It epitomizes the Pokemon bubble perfectly and encapsulates that into one beautiful, shiny card. So I do think, this card is going to continue going up over time. Honestly, I wish I bought a PSA 10 a few months ago, if not like a year or two ago, when it was much cheaper. And if we take a look at the pop report for this card, it is significantly harder to grade than some of the other cards we've looked at today. Only a 34% gem rate. So nothing crazy. I would say it's fairly hard to grade this card and get it in a PSA 10. We have about 47,000 copies graded with PSA, and only 16,000 came back as PSA 10s. So this population of PSA 10s is actually not crazy high, although a lot of copies have been graded with PSA. So it's one of those cards where there's such high volume being graded with PSA, but it doesn't have a crazy high gem rate or anything. So I think there is some scarcity here with the PSA 10s. And, who knows, maybe it could stagnate at that $4,000 price point. Or, maybe it takes a little bit of a breather and then starts chugging back up again. It's really hard to say, but I do think in the long term, this card is going to do great in a PSA 10 or raw. Next, we have the Umbreon VMAX Alt Art from Evolving Skies. Now, this card, I feel like, is still used as a benchmark for how strong the hobby is at the moment. Typically, if this card is doing well and is continuing to rise in a raw and a PSA 10, then that typically means the market in general is going to be pretty strong. I would say there's a high correlation between the price of this card and the strength of the overall market. Currently, if we take a look at the 3-month chart for this card on TCG Player, We're up about 27% over the past 3 months. And this card right now is sitting at about $2,300 on TCG Player. The lowest listed are closer to $2,500. And we only have 17 copies listed on TCG Player, about 8 selling per month. So I feel like at this point, a lot of people who are looking for this card raw are probably turning their heads towards eBay, where they can see pictures, or local card shows where they can just see it in person and make sure they're getting what they paid for. So if you are still trying to find a deal for this card, I would say probably eBay or local card shows are your best bet. I would probably stay away from TCG Player at this point. Taking a look at the PSA 10 price over time, right now the PSA 10 looks to be almost at that $5,000 price point. You could say we're getting to that $4,500 to $5,000 price point. There does seem to be a sale at $5,500. It might have been a best offer, but otherwise we are in that high $4,000 range right now for this card in a PSA 10, continuously going up. And I guess that's a good barometer of how strong the hobby is at the moment. And honestly, I don't think we'll see many of these chase cards come down in price until we see this card kind of stall out or start coming down a bit. So just keep your eye on this card for a good indicator of the overall strength of the market. And if you look at the pop report for this card, it's almost a 70% gem rate with PSA. So very easy card to grade with PSA. We have almost 30,000 copies submitted, and over 20,000 came back a PSA 10. So there are a lot of PSA 10s out there, and a lot of raw copies are getting that PSA 10 slapped onto them. But, it's just such an iconic card, and I think over time, this card is going to continue to go up. It's hard to say where the ceiling is for this card in a raw or in a PSA 10. Once we hit that $5,000 mark, I do expect some stagnation for this card. And, maybe even like a 10% retracement. That would be my guess as to where this card's going in the near future. So perhaps we see some kind of similar price action in the near future, but time will tell. And taking a look at the Umbreon EX from Prismatic Evolutions, this card in a raw is less valuable than the Umbreon VMAX. In the past 3 months, it's up about 26%. And if we take a look at current quantity on TCG Player, we have 29 copies listed and about 28 selling per month. Lowest listed on TCG Player, we have one at $1,350, and then we go right up to $1,550. And then after that, there seems to be a pretty big spread on the listings. We go right up to $1,600 and then all the way up to about $1,775. So if we do see a few more sales on this card, I do think the price is going to fly pretty fast. And taking a look at the PSA 10 prices for this card in a PSA 10 is definitely getting close to that $6,000 price point. So this card has already eclipsed the Umbreon VMAX in a PSA 10 quite a while ago. We do see some sales above $6,000 already. And honestly, it does look like this card has already crossed $6,000. So, pretty expensive card. Not too long ago, it was about $4,000, $5,000 for a PSA 10. And to be honest, I thought that price was a bit overvalued because I just didn't think that this card was as iconic as the Umbreon VMAX. But, it's not just about how iconic it is. It's also about the data and the pop report. I think nowadays the pop report is playing a huge factor into how these cards are being priced and valued by the market. For example, with the Umbreon VMAX, we had over 20,000 PSA 10s. But for this Umbreon EX, we have less than 6,000. And we have a gem rate of less than 30%. So pretty hard to grade this card. And I think that low gem rate is what's holding up the price of this card in a PSA 10. It's giving it that almost 4x multiplier from the raw price to the PSA 10 price. So if you do happen to find these cards in great condition and great centering and no edge wear or anything like that, maybe give it a shot. Maybe give it a shot with PSA. But yeah, absolutely insane to see how well this card's been doing recently. And for the last card we're going to look at today, we're going to go back in time a little bit and take a look at the Latias and Latios GX alt art from Team Up. So this is the top hit from the Team Up set. And if we take a look at the raw price, it's been pretty stagnant over the past 3 months. And over the past year even, it's only up about 37%, which is nothing crazy compared to some of the other modern cards that have been flying recently. Taking a look at the PSA 10 price for this card, the PSA 10 price has been completely detached from the raw pricing for this card. Even about 2.5 months ago, we were at that $10,000 price range, which we pretty much stagnated at for, almost the past 6 months or so. And now we've pretty much almost doubled up from that price since then. This card seems to be about $16,000 to $17,000. And if we take a look at the recent sales, we have sales kind of all over the place. We have one at $19,200. We have one at $15,500. But otherwise, we are pretty close to that $16,000 range. So pretty crazy what the PSA 10 price is doing. And if we take a look at the pop report, this card is pretty low pop, has about 2,400 PSA 10s out there and about a 40% gem rate. So not super hard to grade, but it is less than 50%. So fairly hard card to get in a PSA 10. And there's definitely not a high population of this card out there. And I don't think there's going to be many new PSA 10s added onto this population, considering how old this set is as of now and how expensive the packs are to open, along with, the pretty low gem rate. So the PSA 10s, this population is probably just going to increase slowly over time, but we're not going to see any like double ups, or we're not going to see this card hit like 5,000 PSA 10s, at least within the next, 5 to 10 years or something like that. So pretty crazy what's going on. I think with all of the new demand in the hobby and a lot of the institutional money coming in, a lot of vendors looking for quick flips and looking to invest in cards that might go up in price and they can later sell them for a profit. We have so many factors kind of pulling at these cards' supply and just, adding money to the market constantly over time. That's why we're seeing these PSA 10 prices go to the moon for a lot of these older cards with less population. And for the newer cards where there's more submissions being handled by PSA and more cards coming back in 10s, those cards are kind of stagnating in terms of PSA 10 pricing, but the raw prices do either seem to be holding steady or continually going up. So I think that's kind of where we're at in the market right now. Take that for what it's worth and, make your plays accordingly. But all in all, a very strong market still. And I think we're going to continue this strength till the 30th anniversary. And then from there, who knows what's going to happen. We have more great sets coming out later this year. The Rayquaza set. I believe we have a Kyogre and Groudon set coming out as well. So a lot of hype is going to carry us through the rest of the year. And I believe this bull market will continue. But I also believe people are getting a little bit wiser and not just throwing money out anymore. I think a lot of people are more strategic now with where they're putting their money. And that's why you see kind of these rational decisions where ultramodern cards might have their PSA 10 prices come down a bit and their raw prices go up, while these older cards have their PSA 10 prices go up and their raw prices come down a bit or just stagnate a bit. So pretty interesting what's happening right now in the market. And hopefully you guys got some value from this video and are able to make some good decisions. And yeah, that's all I got today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.